In the ancient text of 1 Thessalonians, the Apostle Paul writes to an early Christian community to strengthen their faith during a crisis. He reminds them that they are destined for trials, making it clear that trouble and persecution are guaranteed parts of following Jesus. Many people extend this guarantee of personal trouble into a requirement for total passivity. They interpret the command to turn the other cheek as a strict order to silently absorb every form of harm the world throws at them. If strict silent submission is the absolute rule, a believer facing an angry mob is expected to endure the violence. But what happens when that same believer watches a vulnerable neighbor being exploited? Does the command to accept personal harm also require them to stand by and watch others suffer? Applying total passivity across the board forces people to turn a blind eye to worldly evils. It demands silence in the face of systemic racism, predatory economic exploitation, and interpersonal abuse. Conflating personal sacrifice with the passive enabling of injustice abandons the vulnerable individuals God commands His followers to protect. This ledger shows the core distinction that resolves the tension. On the left, under personal rights, you absorb wrongs directed at yourself for the sake of the kingdom. On the right, under justice for others, you fight wrongs against the vulnerable because God commands it. The mandate to intervene is woven directly into the text. Proverbs 31 orders believers to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Isaiah 1 commands them to defend the oppressed. And Proverbs 24 requires active rescue for those being led away to death. The popular image of Jesus as perpetually passive contrasts sharply with His recorded actions. When He found financial predators exploiting worshippers in the temple, He drove them out with a whip and physically dismantled their operation. He systematically attacked the corrupt religious authorities of His day with His words, publicly calling the powerful Pharisees whitewashed tombs and snakes. On trial for His life, facing the Roman governor Pilate, He refused to cower. He asserted absolute truth directly to the man holding His death warrant, stating, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." In John chapter 18, when a high priest's guard strikes Jesus in the face, he does not literally turn his cheek for another blow. He legally challenges the assault, demanding to know, "If I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?" He refused to retaliate with violence, but his pattern of behavior shows that resisting evil on behalf of justice is a required action. The early church followed this example, specifically seen in the Apostle Paul's legal battles in the Roman city of Philippi. Paul paid a heavy personal cost for preaching the gospel, routinely absorbing illegal beatings, stonings, and miserable prison sentences without striking back at his attackers. In Acts chapter 16, local magistrates beat and imprison him without a trial. Paul forced a legal confrontation by invoking his Roman citizenship, a status that guaranteed the right to a fair trial and protected against arbitrary physical punishment. He escalated this legal resistance throughout his ministry, eventually making a formal appeal to Caesar to halt the localized corruption that was threatening his life. Paul leveraged the Roman legal system to force corrupt officials into accountability, establishing a firm precedent of protection for the broader church. The early apostles willingly took the religious persecution that came with Christ, while weaponizing civil law to build a firewall against systemic injustice. This historical precedent provides exact instructions for handling modern abuse. Escaping an abusive situation protects an image bearer of God and fulfills the biblical call to guard the life and dignity of others. This chart categorizes modern injustices demanding active intervention. The first branch represents systemic evils, societal structures like racism and economic exploitation. The second branch expands into evils harming the vulnerable, like child abuse and human trafficking, which believers must destroy. The final line separating righteous resistance from worldly retaliation is the underlying motive behind the action. Resistance is fueled by the necessity of stopping evil from spreading to the next victim, rather than a personal desire for revenge. The mandate for the disciple is dual-natured. You carry the cross of personal persecution with grace, and you pick up the shield to defend the vulnerable from the injustices of the world.